You expect disturbing events in crime documentaries or war archives, but not in a plastic cup filled with homemade alcohol, not inside a forest where families quietly starve to death, and certainly not at a modern airport where a plane falls from the sky just 33 seconds after takeoff. Yet sometimes, the most haunting stories come from real life, events that unfolded in plain sight, fully witnessed, yet still defy understanding. In this episode, we're uncovering disturbing events so shocking, you'll wonder how they ever happened in the first place. These are not rumors, not ghost stories. These are verified, documented, and devastating moments of reality. Each one a reminder that horror does not always wear a mask. And it begins with a drink that cost less than $1, but ended over 50 lives in one afternoon. June 2024, Kalakurchi District, Tamil Nadu, a sleepy agricultural district in southern India, known more for its sugarcane fields than global headlines. But that month, something horrific unfolded. Something that wasn't caused by war, weather, or rebellion. It came in a clear, unmarked pouch, sold in alleyways, poured into plastic cups, and shared among friends. Locals called it arak, cheap, bootleg alcohol. It had become a mainstay for low-income laborers, truck drivers, construction workers, farmers looking to unwind after a hard day under the sun. But what none of them knew was that this batch wasn't just illegally brewed, it was poisoned. To cut costs and boost the kick, a group of black market distributors laced the liquor with industrial-grade methanol, a substance normally found in antifreeze and fuel. Unlike ethanol, which is safe in small doses, methanol is a stealth killer, tasteless, odorless, and utterly devastating to the human body. Symptoms began within hours: violent vomiting, blurred vision, hallucinations. For many, the pain turned into panic as they realized they could no longer see. Some collapsed in their homes, others fell unconscious on the streets. Ambulances flooded local villages, carrying people in droves to the district hospital, which quickly became overwhelmed. By June 23rd, over 56 people were confirmed dead, and more than 200 were hospitalized. Entire families were affected. One survivor described seeing her husband go blind before her eyes, moments before he slipped into a coma. In the waiting rooms, doctors had to triage victims based on who still had a fighting chance. Autopsies confirmed methanol toxicity. It had shut down organs, seared optic nerves, and filled lungs with fluid. And yet, the victims had paid just 50 rupees, less than $1, for what became their last drink. The government's response was swift, but not nearly fast enough. 2 local officials, the district collector, and the police superintendent, were suspended. Police raided brewing dens, seizing 200 liters of toxic alcohol. Several arrests were made, including a man believed to be the kingpin of the operation. But the truth was uglier. This wasn't the first time. India has seen dozens of methanol tragedies over the years, often in the poorest states, where unlicensed liquor is both accessible and untraceable. In 2015, 100 died in Mumbai. In 2022, 70 in Bihar. The cycle repeats, the outrage fades, then it happens again. Why? Because the economics are simple. Poor workers want cheap alcohol. Bootleggers want high profit. Methanol is cheap, effective, and deadly. And the authorities? They're often underfunded, undertrained, or worse, on the take. This wasn't a freak incident. It was a predictable catastrophe, one that will likely happen again. It was a slow, invisible massacre delivered in a drink. But what if death came not in sips, but in silence, deep in the woods, under the command of a man who claimed to speak for God? In the spring of 2023, one of the most chilling discoveries in modern African history unfolded quietly in a forest on the Kenyan coast. There was no war, no natural disaster, no viral outbreak, and yet more than 400 people died, including children, toddlers, and newborns, all under the twisted grip of a self-proclaimed prophet. They called it the Shakahola Massacre. At the center of it was Paul Nthenge Mackenzie, a former taxi driver who had reinvented himself as a preacher. Through his organization, Good News International Ministries, Mackenzie gained a devout following across rural Kenya, mostly among people who were poor, desperate, and hungry for spiritual answers. But Mackenzie didn't offer hope. He offered an escape, a shortcut to salvation. His claim was that the world was ending, and only those who starved themselves to death would be saved and enter heaven first. He didn't just preach this, he enforced it. It started slowly. Families moved into the remote Shakahola forest, believing they were beginning a spiritual journey. Followers were told to give up everything: phones, IDs, land deeds, even shoes. They destroyed their worldly possessions and isolated themselves deep in the forest, far from roads and civilization. Children were separated from their parents, couples were divided, conversations were limited, food was prohibited. They were told to fast until they meet Jesus. In April 2023, authorities responded to tips that something was very wrong. A few survivors had managed to escape the forest, emaciated, traumatized, whispering about mass graves. What rescue teams found was worse than anyone expected. Scattered across acres of dense woodland were shallow graves, each filled with multiple bodies. Some were curled up, as if they had died in sleep. Others were found with ropes, blindfolds, or signs of trauma. It quickly became clear that not everyone had starved to death peacefully. Some had been beaten, others were strangled. And in at least one case, investigators concluded the victim had been buried alive. Autopsies revealed a pattern. The starvation was real, but so was violence. Survivors told stories of enforcers, handpicked by Mackenzie, who would beat or tie up anyone who tried to leave or resist. Parents were instructed to starve their children first, then themselves. Infants were denied water. The more obedient you were, the faster you got to heaven. And no one was coming to stop it. Before the government even realized what was happening, dozens, then hundreds, were already dead. The final death toll reached 429 confirmed bodies, with numerous others still missing. Many victims were never formally identified, buried without names, without funeral rites, and without justice. But perhaps the most horrifying twist was that this could have been prevented. Paul Mackenzie had been arrested multiple times before. In 2017, he was charged after 2 children in his congregation starved to death. In 2019, he was brought in again for promoting dangerous teachings and illegal homeschooling. Both times, he was released on bond, and each time, his influence only grew. When he was finally arrested for the Shakahola deaths, he claimed it wasn't his fault. He denied responsibility, saying everyone had fasted voluntarily. But survivors told another story. They described how Mackenzie twisted scripture into psychological warfare, weaponizing trust to push people past their breaking point. A handwritten manifesto found buried in the forest laid out his plan. A tiered fasting structure, separating Phase 1, Phase 2, and Final Transition believers. He wasn't just running a church, he was orchestrating a mass human sacrifice. In the aftermath, Kenyan President William Ruto compared him to a terrorist. Investigations revealed that local police had ignored complaints for years, and religious oversight was virtually non-existent. Journalists found that at least 20 children were forced to dig their own graves. Some adults were forcibly restrained to prevent them from escaping. And still, some followers remained loyal. Even after rescue, some survivors refused food and tried to continue fasting in government shelters. The Shakahola massacre raised international alarm over how dangerous unchecked religious extremism can become when mixed with poverty, isolation, and charismatic manipulation. Religious freedom is important, but so is public safety. And when hundreds can die without the world noticing, something has gone terribly wrong. The Shakahola forest is now a graveyard of faith twisted into violence. But not all disturbing disappearances involve cults. In the next case, it's the forest itself that seems to take people, and no one can explain why. Some places become famous for their beauty, others for their darkness. In the quiet woodlands of New England, an unsettling pattern has been forming, one that authorities avoid linking, but locals can no longer ignore. It began in early 2025. The body of 21-year-old Adriana Suazo was discovered in a wooded area near Milton, Massachusetts. Her walk had been routine. No storm, no crime scene, just a familiar trail through local trees. But she never came back. When her body was found, there were no signs of trauma. Her clothing was undisturbed. Nothing suggested foul play. Medical examiners could not determine a cause of death. At first, it felt like a tragedy, isolated and rare. But soon, more names emerged. On March 6th, Paige Fannin, a healthy 35-year-old, was found in the Norwalk River in Connecticut. She had no history of medical issues. Authorities called it drowning, yet her lungs held no water. The current that day was calm. 2 weeks later, Denise Leary, aged 59, was discovered near the Quinnipiac River. There were no bruises, no injuries, and nothing in her system to explain what had happened. She had simply collapsed and died. Michelle Romano, 56, vanished while foraging in Johnston, Rhode Island. Her body was found just off a popular footpath. No signs of struggle, no witnesses. Another unexplained death in a familiar location. By May, the count had reached double digits. Most of the victims were women, many between their 30s and 60s. They had been doing ordinary things, walking a dog, collecting herbs, enjoying a day outside. Each one left home in good health. None returned alive. And none of the deaths had a clear explanation. Local police departments treated the cases as separate incidents, different towns, different coroners, different files. But when families began comparing timelines, patterns started to appear. All of the bodies were found near rivers or in wooded areas. Most were discovered within a few hours of being reported missing. All lacked signs of injury. In many cases, toxicology reports were inconclusive or delayed. Still, authorities refused to connect the dots. Online forums and neighborhood groups filled the silence. Some speculated that a serial killer might be targeting women in isolated areas. Others believed something environmental was at play, perhaps exposure to an undetected toxin in the soil or water. Then came the map. A local data analyst created a visual timeline of the deaths, showing their proximity to each other. It revealed a narrow corridor stretching from Boston to lower Connecticut, marked with pinpoints along forest edges and river bends. It no longer looked like a coincidence. Yet officials remained silent. Each police department maintained their findings. No shared investigation. Just quiet funerals and closed cases. What made this story disturbing was not just the deaths themselves, but the absence of any resolution. Adriana's mother later described how her daughter loved the outdoors, often spending afternoons sketching near the riverbank. There was no reason for her to die that day. She had made no plans for danger. She simply vanished into the calm. You see, some deaths leave behind no clues, but the next one left behind something even more disturbing. Millions of eyewitnesses, and not one person who could stop what was coming. April 30th, 1998. Los Angeles was already having a difficult day. Traffic was backed up, the weather was dry and hot, and local news helicopters were flying overhead as they often did. But what they captured that afternoon wasn't traffic or police chases or storm damage. It was a man pacing on the shoulder of a freeway, with a shotgun in one hand and a burning car behind him. That man was Daniel V. Jones, a 40-year-old telecommunications technician, married, living a quiet life in suburban California. But behind that quiet exterior, Jones had been battling something invisible: terminal AIDS and cancer diagnoses. He believed his doctors and his health maintenance organization had failed him, delayed treatment, denied access. And now, he believed he was out of time. So Daniel took his final statement to the freeway. Around 3 p.m., Jones parked his 1994 Toyota pickup truck on a bridge overlooking the Harbor Freeway. He lit the car on fire using gasoline. He held up handmade signs, scribbled with his complaints about HMOs and his desperate messages. Then he pulled out a shotgun and began pacing. Police shut down traffic in both directions. Helicopters hovered, and reporters went live. For over an hour, millions watched him live on TV, unsure of what they were seeing. He waved his arms, shouted at the sky. At one point, he released a small dog from his vehicle, who limped into the chaos, badly burned by the fire. The scene was chaotic, raw, and surreal. Then, just before 4 p.m., Daniel V. Jones turned, raised the shotgun to his own chest, and pulled the trigger. It aired live on KTTV Channel 11, unfiltered, without delay. Across Southern California, viewers, many of them children just getting home from school, watched as Jones collapsed, motionless, onto the pavement. The backlash was immediate. The station had been airing the footage raw, believing it was covering a public protest. There was no delay mechanism in place. Broadcasters defended the decision at first, calling it a newsworthy event. but the public erupted in outrage. Lawsuits were threatened. Psychologists reported a spike in trauma complaints, and local stations began implementing a delay system for all future live feeds. But even deeper than the media failure was the personal tragedy of a man who felt he had nowhere else to turn. In his car, investigators found a camcorder and a videotape of Jones explaining his motives in detail. He said he was not mentally ill, but he was dying, in pain, and abandoned by a system that had failed him. He wanted people to see what despair looked like, and millions did. It remains one of the most disturbing moments in live television history, not because it was graphic, but because it was real, unedited, unplanned, and unforgettable. But while Daniel's final act was broadcast live for millions to see, the next tragedy unfolded in the skies, unexpected and devastating. One moment it was a routine flight, the next it was falling out of the sky with no warning at all. It was just after lunch on a warm June afternoon in Ahmedabad. At the Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel International Airport, passengers were boarding Air India Flight 182, a Boeing 787-8, Dreamliner bound for London Gatwick. Families chatted, business travelers checked their phones, and crew performed their final checks. On paper, this was a routine international flight, the kind that departs every day without drama. But what happened next would become one of the deadliest and most disturbing aviation disasters in India's history. At 1:38 p.m. local time, Flight 182 lifted off the tarmac. 33 seconds later, it was a fireball crashing into a residential campus building. According to eyewitnesses, the aircraft barely gained altitude. Instead of ascending smoothly, it appeared to hang mid-air, as if something was wrong. Some onlookers reported a burst of flame near the wing shortly after takeoff. Moments later, the aircraft banked slightly, lost lift, and slammed into the BJ Medical College hostel building, located just 2 kilometers from the runway. The crash tore through the structure like a missile, igniting an inferno. Students, medical staff, and visitors inside the hostel were caught completely off guard. Debris, fire, and smoke engulfed the area within seconds. Rescue workers described the aftermath as an urban war zone. Of the 242 people on board the Dreamliner, 230 passengers and 12 crew, 241 died on impact or within moments of the crash. Only one man, seated near the front of the aircraft, survived. On the ground, 33 people were killed, including a former chief minister of Gujarat, Vijay Rupani, who happened to be visiting a relative inside the hostel that day. Others lost included young medical students and residents who never imagined a plane would drop from the sky into their home. The fire department, police, and National Disaster Response Force responded immediately. But the scale of devastation was so massive that recovery took hours. Smoke rose for most of the afternoon. By the following morning, rescue workers had pulled over 80 bodies from the wreckage. Initial theories included mechanical failure, pilot error, and even a bird strike, but none matched the chaos seen on the flight's black box recording. Though the final report has not yet been published, early investigation findings suggest the aircraft stalled almost immediately after takeoff. One engine had apparently failed to provide proper thrust, and the wing flaps had not fully retracted. Combined with an unconfirmed issue related to the landing gear not lifting, these failures created catastrophic drag. Making matters worse, Indian regulators later revealed that just 1 week before the crash, the same aircraft had undergone emergency maintenance in Mumbai due to an engine vibration warning. It had been cleared for service less than 48 hours before Flight 182's departure. Families of victims were devastated, not just by the loss, but by the lack of answers. British and Indian passengers alike demanded transparency. Vigils were held in London and Ahmedabad. Compensation was announced, 1 crore rupees per victim, but many called it hollow in the face of such negligence. International aviation authorities, including the US National Transportation Safety Board and the UK's Air Accidents Investigation Branch, joined the Indian Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau in examining what went wrong. Focus quickly turned to Air India's maintenance logs, crew training protocols, and fleet-wide checks on the Boeing 787's GE engines. Today, the crash of Flight 182 stands as a chilling reminder of how even state-of-the-art aircraft can become death traps when human oversight and mechanical reliability falter in tandem. A routine flight, a sunny day, and 274 lives gone in just 33 seconds. What makes this event so disturbing isn't just the scale of the disaster, it's how ordinary it all seemed, until it wasn't. Some stories slipped through the cracks, others never had a chance to be heard. But as you have just witnessed, the most disturbing events are not buried in fiction. They are hidden in plain sight. So the next time you hear a strange headline, do not dismiss it. Because the truth does not ask for permission to be terrifying. If this episode caught you off guard, share it with someone who thinks they have seen everything. And tell us which real-life events you think the world still needs to wake up to. Thanks for watching. Stay sharp, stay curious, and never stop questioning.